Hello and welcome to a live Kerfefe break on Deprogrammed with Keri Smith. I'm your host, Keri, and we are going to be continuing. I'm streaming all week this week at 1 o'clock Central Time. We're doing a series on the recently released WPATH Files, the WPATH Files, as some people are calling them, the WPATH Files, which is the World Professional Association of Transgender Health. These files were released by two journalists, Michael Shellenberger and Mia Hughes, and it's quite a bit to get through. It's about 130 pages worth of evidence. There's the report, and then there's the hard files. You can go and read them yourself. I have linked the WPATH files below this video, whether you're watching on YouTube or Rumble. You can find the link below, and it's got all the records, like the hard evidence of communications, statements that these doctors have made behind the scenes, and it also includes video. So I suggest you go and watch it yourself. If you don't have time to do that, we're working through it all week. We're just kind of covering some of the most important highlights from the files so that people hear about it. And hopefully, I'm trying to keep in mind, I want these videos to be seen by people who are on the left and maybe casually support what they have been told is, called gender affirming care for kids. I would submit to you, if you're on the left, think about that phrase. It's a bit Orwellian. It's telling you what to think about it. The phrase itself tells you what to think about it. Gender affirming care, which includes prescribing children puberty blockers, which are not approved by the FDA for that purpose. Most often they're prescribed Lupron, and which these WPATH files show. You have the president of WPATH on video admitting that in 100% of cases where they've given puberty blockers to little boys in Tanner stage 2, which is Tanner stage 2 is around the ages of like 9 to 11 years old, that in 100% of those cases, those boys never go on to never achieve orgasm in adult life, that they are chemically castrated for life. So gender affirming care, AKA chemical castration through puberty blockers. Other things we've seen in the files that we've already covered in the first two videos include testosterone in young girls causing liver tumors. According to the doctors, they themselves think it's most likely the hormones causing it. Liver tumors, liver cancer, even death. So these things that are lumped under gender affirming care include giving puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones to children that cause sterilization, permanent medical problems, and in some cases death. It also includes surgeries like double mastectomy, cutting off a young child's breasts. It includes, today we're going to look at it includes what they call vaginoplasty, where they cut off a young child's penis, and they try and construct a so-called neo-vagina. And it's basically an open wound. And we've already covered in the first video some of the complications and deaths from that. So these things are what are lumped under that phrase. And I do hope, if you're on the left, that you take the time to listen to some of the stuff that's in the files or read it yourself. And as I said in the last video, I can't stress this enough. I'm going to stress it again. You're an adult. You don't have to trust the journalist who put the report out. You don't have to trust me. You don't have to trust anyone who's talking about it. You're an adult, so trust yourself enough to be able to read the report, look at the hard evidence contained in the report, the files, the video, and you're an adult. You can parse opinion from fact and make up your own mind. If you think you have an opinion about this, you owe it to yourself, to society, to children, to be well informed, to know the facts. In fact, if you think it won't change your mind, then it'll only make your argumentation stronger. It'll only make, if that's what you think, knowing the facts will only make your argument stronger. So go and look at the facts. That's what I encourage everyone to do. We're going to get into it. I just want to say welcome to everyone in the chat. I see a lot of regulars here, including my husband's here today. Cheeky Mayor, not late today. I thought I was late. I thought I was a little late. Thank you guys for being patient. Good to see you. If it's your first time here, usually we do these live shows on Mondays and Fridays at 1:00, and always at Mondays and Fridays. So you're welcome to join us. We talk about what's in the news, and we just try to make sense of this chaotic world, to make sense of social justice ideology or woke ideology. There's many names for it, which is my old belief system. And it's about better understanding the world and what's happening in the world through the lens of tearing apart my old belief system and showing how it's influencing leading to a lot of cultural problems at the moment. We also do interviews. I have an interview with Jen Atkins, who's in the chat, that's going to be coming out soon. Jen, I owe you an email because I think I might wait until next week to put the interview out, since I'm doing so many videos this week. I don't want it to get buried. But we have more interviews in the can, and this Wednesday night, tomorrow night, 6:00 Central, we're doing another episode of That Christian Panel. It's gonna be so much fun because we have a special guest. Drunk 3PO will be with us, and I love when we have special guests. It's always fun to mix it up a little bit, and then our regular panelists will all be here. Brahma Bull, Michelle from Force of Light, and Odin from OMB Reviews. We're gonna be reviewing and discussing the film Ordinary Angels, which is currently in theaters. If you wanna watch it, you still have tonight to go see it, or sometime tomorrow, I guess, before our show. So you have to go to the theater to see. I don't know any way to see it online. You have to go and see it. And Michelle from Force of Light recommended it. She said it's a great film. So we're all going to take a look at it and then talk about it tomorrow. So that'll be fun. Okay, let's get into it. I've got a couple other little thing. I'll save these for the end. Okay. So let's get into the WPATH files. I'm going to open this up. There's some breaking news this morning that relates to this topic. So I'm going to put this on the screen first. This is from The Independent. You can find it in other news sources, of course, if you do just a quick search for it. But this relates to the topic at hand. Now, one of the friends I was talking with about this, it seems to be that this friend's opposition to banning these procedures for children is rooted just in opposing the government doing it. I disagree because I don't care who does it. If it's the medical establishment that self-regulates, great, which is happening in a lot of the European countries. But if the medical establishment is not self-regulating, which it doesn't appear to be doing here in the States, well, then it is up for the government to come in my opinion, to come in and say, no, it's actually already against existing law. You are violating the Hippocratic Oath. You are mutilating, sterilizing, and in some cases killing children. Like, these things shouldn't be allowed already. And if the medical community won't stop it, then I do believe that those who are regulars on this channel, as you know, I'm pretty critical of the government. I'm not a fan of the government in general. I think we need less government. I think it's a behemoth and it has undue influence in all kinds of spheres of human life that it should not have influence. But one of the few things I think the government is there to do is to enforce laws that protect the abuse of one party by another party. And that's pretty much the only thing it's good for. And in this case, I do think if it takes the government stepping in and saying, this is abuse of children by the medical establishment, then yeah, I think they should be doing that. Here in the UK, it was the medical community, the NHS. I'm going to read this headline. The NHS says children to no longer receive puberty blockers at gender identity clinics. Subtitle: Puberty blockers, which pause the physical changes of puberty, such as breast development or facial hair, will now only be available to children as part of clinical research trials. So I got this wrong at first. I thought they were banning it for clinical trials too. They're not, but they're severely limiting it just to these clinical trials. And as you'll see in the piece, I think it's less than 100 kids who are part of these trials. Children will no longer be prescribed puberty blockers at gender identity clinics, NHS England has confirmed. Puberty blockers, which pause the physical changes of puberty, such as breast development or facial hair, will now only be available to children as part of clinical research trials. Fewer than 100 young people are currently on puberty blockers, and they will be able to continue their treatment. These children are being seen by specialist endocrine services at Leeds and University College London Hospital. The decision comes after a public consultation on the issue and an NHS England commissioned independent review of 2020 of gender identity services for children under 18. So this was an independent review commissioned by NHS, by the government, but they asked these doctors to do an independent review and tell, hey, what's the evidence? Is there evidence to support that we should be doing this to children? That review, led by Dr. Hilary Cass, followed a rise in referrals to the Gender Identity Development Service, GIDS, run by the Tavistock and Portman NHS Foundation Trust. In the year to April 2022, there were over 5,000 referrals to GIDS compared to just under 250 a decade earlier. We've covered this on the show before as well. If you're on the left and you're watching this, I hope you are, you may not know that a lot of people, you may think it's a right-wing talking point, but it's true that there has been an epidemic, an explosion in the number of children who are now saying they're trans and who are trying to get referred for this so-called gender affirming care. Look at that. It was 250. Now it's 5,000 a year. And that's not an isolated case at this particular clinic. Look at any clinic in the States. It's the same thing. Now, I know a lot of people on the left like to say this is their explanation for that. I think they're working backwards they want the conclusion to be, it's like, it's the opposite of science. It's like you decide what you want your conclusion to be and then work backwards to that. They want the conclusion to be, well, this doesn't mean that it's a fad or a trend or there's some kind of social contagion going on with kids influencing one another or, like kids do. That's not what this means. They want it to mean that, well, there've always been this many so-called trans kids. They just never felt safe to come forward before. That's what they argue. They're saying well, these people have always just been in hiding before. Now they're free to come out and go to these clinics and get the so-called gender affirming care for kids. That's what they want us to believe. Historically, that is not true. Historically, it's been less than 1%, I believe 0.01% of children who have struggled persistently with what used to be called gender dysphoria, with believing, feeling uncomfortable in their body and the biological sex that they are. Historically, it was also most often young boys. Now we see the opposite is true. It used to be young boys, and it used to present when they were toddlers, like around the age of 2 or 3. And now what you're seeing is completely the opposite. Abigail Schreier has covered this in her book, Irreversible Damage. But with what I believe is a social contagion, what has come from it is all these young people influencing one another. It's become trendy. It has become a way to get very quick validation, acceptance, celebration, to feel like you're part of an oppressed group, which in the social justice world that we've created, my old ideology, you are given social currency if you're part of an oppressed group. So the way it presents now is most often with girls, and it's in adolescence. Same demographic where we have seen in previous decades other kinds of social contagions that spread like wildfire through young adolescent girls, preteens. If you think back to the 90s, all of a sudden there was this explosion in anorexia. There was an explosion in cutting. These things that kids learned about from other kids or maybe were shown in popular media. Then suddenly it's more kids doing it, well, I do that too, kind of thing. Okay, I'll continue reading. The clinic has come under repeated scrutiny and is closing at the end of March. Following the Tavistock's closure, 2 new NHS services will now open in early April. situated in London's Great Ormond Street Hospital and Alderhay Children's Hospital in Liverpool. In February of 2022, Dr. Cass published an interim report saying there was a need to move away from one unit and recommended the creation of a regional services to better support youngsters. The NHS has said that children attending these clinics will be supported by clinical experts in neurodiversity, pediatrics, and mental health, quote, resulting in a holistic approach to care, end quote. Around 250 patients are expected to be transferred to the new clinics from GIDS when they open, and some 5,000 more children and young people are currently on the waiting list for referral to the new clinics. Dr. Cass also pointed to a lack of long-term evidence. Oh, really? A lack of long-term evidence and data collection on what happens to children and young people who are prescribed medication. She added that GIDS had not collected routine and consistent data, quote, which means it is not possible to accurately track the outcomes and pathways that children and young people take through the service. The government said it's welcomed the landmark decision, adding it would help ensure care is based on evidence and is in the, quote, best interests of the child. Imagine that. Health Minister Maria Caulfield said, "We have always been clear that children's safety and well-being is paramount, so we welcome this landmark decision by the NHS. Ending the routine prescription of puberty blockers will help ensure that care is based on evidence, expert clinical opinion, and is in the best interests of the child." The consultation on the future of services received more than 4,000 responses, including around a quarter from members of the public, 22% from patients, 21% from parents, and 10% from trans adults, and 5% from clinicians. John Stewart, National Director of Specialized Commissioning at NHS England, told the PA news agency, quote, "Given that the debate is often very polarized, so too were the responses to the consultation. Many people said the policy didn't go far enough in terms of still allowing potential access to puberty blockers." Yeah. Through research, and others saying clearly that they disagreed fundamentally and that these should be routinely available to everyone who believes they need it. Everyone? Even kids? As we mentioned in the last episode, if you haven't seen it yet, yesterday we covered a little bit of the history of so-called trans medicine, and we read some of the stuff from the WPATH Files, and then we looked specifically into John Money, who's often called the father of transing kids. And we also touched on briefly a little bit of queer theory, which has informed a lot of the ideology surrounding this so-called medicine, because it's not medicine. There's nothing scientific about it. Excuse me. Part of that is a belief in queer theory that age is another one of these social constructs that we have to destroy, and that we are oppressing children by not treating them as full humans, like not treating them the same as adults. This ideology has filtered down through from academia into education into entertainment, and we see it now in social media, TikTok and Facebook, and people on the streets talking social justice without ever having read any of the theory where all of this comes from. But we see them speaking things that have direct roots in queer theory, critical race theory, feminist theory, etc. One of those concepts, which hasn't yet trickled down to street level, but it's making its way there, is the idea that, and we read some stuff yesterday, I'm not going to read it again today, but you should go read these queer theorist books. They believe that children are full humans capable of consenting not only to invasive surgeries and medication that's going to potentially sterilize them for life, give them lots of medical problems. They believe that kids are capable of consenting to that. They're full humans. They also believe kids are capable of consenting to anything, including sex with adults. And they explicitly say that. That's something that's going to be making its way down the pipeline soon. If you think that this normalization of the idea that kids can consent to this kind of barbarism from the medical establishment, if you think that that's not going to lead psychologically to people then opening their minds to the idea that, well, they can consent to that, why not sex? It's their body, right? That's what's coming next. But you can see it reflected in the way they talk, like this. Should be available to everyone who believes they need it, even kids. Regarding the new clinics, he said, "This is just the first step in building a regional model where our aim is to establish between 7 and 8 specialist centers, including the North and the South hubs, over the next year to 2 years." Oh, wait, hold on. Let me share this one more time. I want to read the very end to you also. Okay. Fewer than 100 young people are currently on puberty blockers. They will be able to continue their treatment and are being seen by specialist endocrine services at Leeds and University College Hospital. It is understood that NHS England hopes to have a study into the use of puberty blockers in place by December 2024, with eligibility criteria yet to be decided. So that's some great news out of the UK. That they are now including not just surgeries, but they are including the puberty blockers and saying this is not gonna be allowed for kids. Um, we're gonna do the same thing here in the US. Lynn says, "I just joined this live, but the expression on Keri's face tells me this is gonna be a hard one." Oh, no. I need to be a little more smiley. I know, but we're talking about hard stuff. Today, we're just gonna go over some of the stuff in the WPATH files that show that these doctors are aware that children are not able, they don't have the cognitive development to be able to consent to these invasive surgeries and medications that in some cases sterilize them or leave them mutilated. I'm gonna show you one more thing in the news quickly, and then we're gonna start reading from the WPATH files. Okay. This is crazy. This was shared by my friend Colin Wright. I've interviewed Colin. If you haven't seen it, he's an evolutionary biologist who he and his girlfriend Christina Buttons, they both cover this issue thoroughly. They write about this. They research and write about this whole movement to trans kids, and they speak out against it. And they're both amazing resources. So anyway, he shared this yesterday, and it's a piece from Intelligencer. Colin says, "This is absolutely wild. The masks are fully off now. We must be prepared to defend the idea that in principle," he's quoting from this piece, quote, "We must be prepared to defend the idea that in principle, everyone should have access to sex-changing medical care regardless of age, gender identity, social environment, or psychiatric history." They include that in there too. That's against the Hippocratic Oath. They're not supposed to be. One of the problems with this whole field is that they have been prescribing cross-sex hormones, puberty blockers, and surgery for patients that they know have pre-existing mental health conditions like dissociative identity disorder, DID, which used to be called multiple personality disorder, or different types of cluster B personality disorders like borderline personality disorder, a feature of which is having an unstable sense of identity. They've also been doing it for people with schizophrenia. So if you've got this underlying condition, the duty as a doctor is to look at that and say, it may not be gender dysphoria. You've got this other thing that we know about that leads to unstable identity. Maybe we don't permanently take your breasts off. But they've been doing the opposite. There's a detransitioner named Prisha. This happened to her. She was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, previous abuse, sexual abuse of all, and they knew all of this. They knew about her eating disorders. They knew about the BPD, and they still pushed her into surgery. She's one of the detransitioners who is now suing the medical establishment, and I hope she takes them to the cleaners. I'm going to look at this because this backs up exactly what we're talking about today, which is that the people who are pushing this, they are ideologues. They're coming from an ideological foundation. They're not coming from a medical foundation or a scientific foundation. They're not basing their arguments on science or medicine. They base their arguments on ideology, specifically on the queer theory part of social justice or woke ideology. That's where they're coming from. Again, this is the same part of social justice ideology that argues that kids are able to consent to sex. Look at the language in this article. This is a brand new piece. Freedom of sex. The moral case for letting trans kids, so-called trans kids, no kid is trans, okay? You got a kid who may not conform to gender standards, okay? They're gender non-conforming. When you call them trans, you're sentencing them to this. You're sentencing them to this identity change and necessarily to medication, surgery, etc. So I don't call them, if I say trans kids, I put it in quotes. But of course, the media is not going to do that. They're going to say it like it's a fact. Freedom of sex, the moral case for letting trans kids change their bodies. Now look at this. He highlighted the part at the bottom. I wish I'm going to probably repost this and highlight this at the top as well. Listen to this. We will never be able to defend the rights of transgender kids until we understand them purely on their own terms, because they're full humans, right? They're just like adults, right? Here we go. They say it as full members of society who would like to change their sex. There it is. That's the queer theory. It says ageism is another type of oppression within intersectionality, that we are oppressing children or kids because we don't treat them as full humans or full members of society. That's what queer theory argues about children. And there it is. It says, we'll never be able to defend the rights of transgender kids until we understand them purely on their own terms as full members of society who would like to change their sex. Look at this part in the italics. It does not matter where this desire comes from. Yes, it does. That is an evil ideological thing to say. Of course it matters where the desire comes from. What if the desire comes from being influenced by by fellow kids, their peers at school who are saying they're trans, and seeing how that boosts their popularity and their validation and their acceptance and what if it comes from that? You're saying that they should be able to go in and make permanent medical decisions about their bodies and about their future fertility based, and it doesn't matter where it comes from. It doesn't matter if it's a trend or a fad. It doesn't matter if they're being influenced by their peers. What if it comes from a place of having been sexually abused when they were kids? What if it comes from being autistic, which we know autistic kids are being highly targeted by this ideology. They have a higher incidence. They're more susceptible to it. It gives them that sense of belonging. Going from the outside to the inside. What if they have some other type of underlying psychiatric condition? Like in Priscia's case, who I mentioned, what if they have a BPD diagnosis, a personality disorder diagnosis? It doesn't matter. This is becoming more common. They used to try and pretend that this was about medicine and science. And they would say, well, the child has to have gender dysphoria, and it has to present for this amount of time. They used to have rules before WPATH did away with them. They used to have rules where, okay, they have to present as the opposite sex for at least a year. They have to have 2 letters of recommendation from different therapists. They got rid of all of this. And they've been saying this kind of stuff lately. Instead of saying, oh, it's based in science and medicine and evidence, which it's not. Like Colin says, they completely took the mask off. They don't even pretend anymore. It's not based in any science or medicine. It's just ideological. They are just saying, if a kid feels like it, give them the testosterone. Chop off their breasts if they feel like it. They're full human beings. They should be able to say they consent and have it done. No research into where this comes from. If there might be underlying conditions, no attempt to help them resolve whatever's going on in their mind. No attempt to help them desist. They used to try and help kids figure out what was actually going on. They used to try and help them to resolve this conflict and to be comfortable in their body, to actually cure it. Not anymore. And I've seen this repeated online where they say things now like a child doesn't have to experience gender dysphoria to be trans. They say this now. They say this now. Do you know what that means? It means they're saying a child doesn't have to feel like they were born in the wrong body or to have discomfort in their biological sex in order to be trans. Well, then what's the point? They're basically admitting it's just a feeling. It's a fancy today. It's a fancy. It's not rooted in any medicine or science. It's completely subjective. I'm a 9-year-old child and today I think I'm a boy and I'd like to have my breast cut off. Mom, hysterectomy, please. That's that's this is madness. So they put that in italics. It does not matter where this desire comes from. When the TARL insinuates again and again that the sudden increase of trans-identified youth is, quote, unexplained, he is trying to bait us into thinking that trans rights lie just on the other side of a good explanation. There, all of this is them saying we don't have to base this in science or medicine, or we don't have to be able to offer a rational explanation for doing that. This is them defending themselves in advance. They're attacking criticism in advance and saying anybody who asks for you know, evidence-based medicine or evidence-based science and that they're just being basically they're being a bigot and they're trying to bait us, you know. We don't have to offer an explanation. We don't have to offer science or medicine. We don't have to offer any kind of evidence whatsoever or any reason. It's just ideology. Why? Because we say so. That's what this is. When the TARL insinuates again and again that the sudden increase of trans-identified youth is unexplained, he is trying to bait us into thinking trans rights lie just on the other side of a good explanation. But any model of where trans people, quote, come from, any at all, is a model that by default calls into question the care of anyone who does not meet its ideological profile. They're saying we should not have to explain this phenomenon. This is as true of the old psychiatric hypothesis that transsexuality resulted from in utero exposure to maternal sex hormones as it is of the well-meaning but misguided search for genes that, quote, cause gender incongruence. It is most certainly true of the current model of gender identity as, quote, consistent, insistent, and persistent, as LGBTQ plus advocates like to say. So they're saying now we're going to get rid of this thing we have been saying, which is gender identity is something that is consistent, insistent, and persistent. And that's how you know. Now they're saying, no, we don't even need to say that. We don't have to say that either. It doesn't have to be consistent or it doesn't have to be a consistent or persistent belief that you were born in the wrong body. It doesn't have to be that at all. It can be a whim. At best, these theories give us a brief respite from the hail of delegitimizing attacks. They will never save us. And here's the part Colin has highlighted. We must be prepared to defend the idea that, in principle, everyone should have access to sex-changing medical care, regardless of age, gender identity, social environment, or psychiatric history. This may strike you as a vertiginous task. The good news is that millions of people already believe it. This is just bragging at the end. They're just bragging about their ideological indoctrination. This whole little bit here is this isn't based in medicine. It's not based in science. There's no evidence to support it. And we don't care. We don't have to base it in those things or present evidence. They're admitting this is ideological only. We think kids should be treated like adults. And then at the end, what are they doing? But they're bragging, and we've already influenced and indoctrinated a lot of people to agree with this. That's what this is. Pretty crazy. Pretty crazy. Thank you for the super chat. Fernando, hey, I recognize you again. For $5.99, he says, in Germany, the Charité, the charity, is that charity? I need my husband for this word. I think that's French, but even with French, I'm gonna I'm sorry. Treats them as, quote, special sexual preference, and they get counseling. Check troubled desire. I should look up troubled desire. Okay. Thank you for that. I will look that up, and I'll also try and get better at my pronunciation. Raphael says this nation's creating a Ken doll nation. Yeah. Okay, we're gonna go to the WPATH files now. I just wanted to show you those two recent items from the news as they relate to everything we're talking about. Um, yesterday we covered, if you tuned in, if you haven't watched it yet, I highly suggest you watch it. We were covering the history, like a brief history of so-called trans medicine. And today we're going to be talking about, here, let me put this on the screen. The evidence contained in the WPATH files that show that the doctors know that children do not understand the effects of hormone therapy. Now, we're not reading every single part of this because, for one, my voice would give out. I'm skipping over just a little bit of here. This is in a larger section called the WPATH has misled the public. We're going to start here with this part. And it gives examples from the evidence that's contained in the files. Okay. WPATH knows that children do not understand the effects of hormone therapy. WPATH Standard of Care 8 recommends that adolescents who have received a diagnosis of, quote, gender incongruence have access to puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgeries, so long as the young person, quote, demonstrates the emotional and cognitive maturity required to provide informed consent or assent for the treatment. However, in video footage obtained by Environmental Progress of an internal WPATH panel titled Identity Evolution Workshop held on May 6, 2022, panel members admit to the impossibility of getting proper informed consent for hormonal interventions from the young patients. During the panel, Dr. Daniel Metzger, a Canadian endocrinologist, discussed the challenges faced when attempting to obtain consent from adolescents seeking this medical treatment. Metzger reminded those assembled that gender doctors are, quote, often explaining these sorts of things to people who haven't even had biology in high school yet, end quote. He added that even adult patients often have very little medical understanding of the effects of these interventions. Metzger describes young patients attempting to pick and choose the physical effects of hormone therapy, with some wanting a deeper voice without facial hair or to take estrogen without developing breasts. This suggests a very poor understanding of the workings of the human body and the treatment pathway on the part of adolescent patients, something noted by the WPATH expert. Quote, it's hard to kind of pick and choose the effects that you want, concluded Metzger. That's something that kids wouldn't normally understand because they haven't had biology yet. But I think a lot of adults as well are hoping to be able to get X without getting Y, and that's not always possible, end quote. Metzger tells his young patients that they might not, quote, be binary, but hormones are binary, end quote. He describes having to explain to children and even adults that, quote, you can't get a deeper voice without probably a bit of a beard. And you can't get estrogen to feel more feminine without some breast development, end quote. There was agreement among the panel of experts about children's inability to comprehend the powerful and life-altering effects of the hormone therapy they are seeking. Another prominent WPATH member, Diane Berg, a child psychologist and co-author of the child chapter of SOC 8, chimed in to say that they would not expect children and young adolescents to grasp the effects of the treatment because it is, quote, out of their developmental range to understand the extent to which some of these medical interventions are impacting them, end quote. The immaturity of these patients was further demonstrated when Berg said, quote, they'll say they understand, but then they'll say something else that makes you think, oh, they didn't really understand that they are going to have facial hair, end quote. Yet publicly, WPATH never discusses any of this. On the rare occasion that WPATH makes public statements, sex trait modification interventions are presented as age appropriate, essential medical care, and any opposition to such interventions is framed as transphobia. Quote, anti-transgender healthcare legislation is not about protections for children, but about eliminating transgender persons on a micro and macro scale, said WPATH President Dr. Marcy Bowers in a May 2023 statement. This is Dr. Marcy Bowers is the guy, the president of the WPATH that we watched in a video in the first episode of this series, admitting on video that 100% of the little boys that they've given puberty blockers to at Tanner stage 2, so like around 11 years old, that 100% of them they go on to never be able to achieve orgasm in adult life. They are essentially chemically castrated for life. That same person who said that in public pretends like there's no reason to oppose that except for trying to eliminate trans people. That there's no reason. She's pretending, he is pretending there's no reasonable cause for opposing that other than transphobia. Okay. Quote, it is a thinly veiled attempt to enforce the notion of a gender binary. That's what Marcy Bauer says. Okay, it's the responsibility of parents to provide legal consent before a doctor can block a child's puberty or administer irreversible cross-sex hormones. But during the panel, Berg provides evidence that even some parents do not have sufficient levels of health literacy to comprehend the effects of this treatment protocol, and she admits that current practices are not ethical. I'm going to pause here for a second. Of course, the parents don't comprehend what they're consenting to because you guys are busy lying to them and publicly saying things like, oh, puberty blockers are irreversible. You say that repeatedly like a mantra. It's a lie, and you know it's a lie, as evidenced in the video footage and the that we just talked about with the president of WPATH. You know it's a lie that it doesn't cause irreversible damage, and yet you say that. You say puberty blockers are reversible, and you say puberty blockers are a pause button, and you indoctrinate parents to believe this. So of course they're not coming in comprehending what they're consenting to on behalf of their kids, because you fed them lies through propaganda already. No matter what they're signing that says they consent, they acknowledge that their child might become sterile and all that, you've fed them these lies. They still think, a lot of them, that the effects of puberty blockers are reversible. They still think that a puberty blocker is just a pause button. Quote, what really disturbs me is when the parents can't tell me what they need to know about a medical intervention that apparently they signed off for, said Berg. She suggests a solution is to, quote, normalize that it is okay not to understand right away and to encourage patients to ask questions. That way, gender affirming healthcare providers can do a, quote, real informed consent process rather than what is currently happening, which Berg thinks is, quote, not what we need to be doing ethically. Again, these are the doctors saying behind the scenes, saying on record, on camera, that this is not ethical what they're currently doing. WPATH knows children cannot consent to iatrogenic fertility loss. Another crucial aspect of the informed consent process that these WPATH members confess is being violated is the issue of allowing minors to consent to a treatment pathway that could result in sterility. WPATH SOC, so the Standard of Care 8, stipulates that doctors must inform the young person about, quote, the potential loss of fertility and available options to preserve fertility, end quote. By advocating for adolescents in early puberty to have access to hormonal interventions that could leave them sterile, the world-leading transgender health group is implying that minors have the cognitive capacity to make such a decision about their future. However, on the inside, prominent WPATH members confess that it's impossible for adolescents to understand the gravity of the decision. Dr. Ren Massey, a psychologist and co-author of the adolescent chapter of the latest Standards of Care, told the panel that according to SOC 8, it is encouraged and ethical to talk about fertility preservation options, stressing that it is, quote, even important for youth who are going on puberty blockers because many of those youth will go directly into affirming hormone therapies, which will eliminate the development of their gonads producing sperm or eggs, end quote. Yes, this is him also admitting what we know and what some of the whistleblowers have said, which is once they get on the puberty blockers, one of the whistleblowers said that in 100% of cases in her clinic, they always go on the hormones next. It's just a funnel. And that's unusual. There's something weird going on there if 100% decide to go on the hormones next. So he says it's ethical. They should be talking about fertility options, even if they're just going on the puberty blockers right now, because they're very likely 100% of cases going on the cross-sex hormones next. And so they need to talk about it because it's going to be, quote, eliminating the development of their gonads producing sperm or eggs, a function that the young patients may desire, quote, if they want to be partners with somebody else later and contributing genetic material for reproduction, end quote. Metzger responded that, now this is the part we watched. In part 1, we covered some highlights and we watched this video and we watched the other doctors laughing when he said this, because they all know it to be true. And also because I think there's something wrong with some of these doctors, but they laughed when he said this. This is where I'm going to read this to you. This is where this doctor admits that he talks with these kids ages 9 to 14 about how this is probably going to sterilize them. And he's admitting that they don't understand what they're agreeing to. So Metzger responded that, quote, it's always a good theory that you talk about fertility preservation with a 14-year-old, but I know I'm talking to a blank wall, adding, they will be like, ooh, kids, babies, gross, end quote, because they're kids. Quote, or the usual answer is, I'm just going to adopt. And then when you ask them, well, what does that involve? Like, how much does it cost? Oh, I thought you just went to the orphanage and they gave you a baby, end quote. This remark was met with smiles and nods from the panel. Yeah, we saw that. These comments prove that WPATH members are aware that the young patients who will lose their fertility as a consequence of gender affirming treatments don't yet understand what they are sacrificing. They do not understand how they may come to want biological children of their own one day, nor do they even understand how adoption works or how arduous it can be to conceive a baby via in vitro fertilization. These private comments are in stark contrast to WPATH's public stance. In a recent statement opposing U.S. bans on sex trait modification interventions for minors, WPATH said, quote, the benefits that these medically necessary interventions have for the overwhelming majority of youth are well documented. Providers who collaboratively assess youth's understanding of themselves, their gender identity, and their ability to make informed decisions regarding medical and surgical interventions, which are not offered prior to puberty and never without the youth's assent, play a very important role in minimizing future regret, end quote. However, WPATH members know this level of understanding is simply not possible, making WPATH's statement dishonest. What's more, members are aware that there's already research showing significant reproductive regret among a cohort of Dutch patients who were some of the first to undergo early puberty suppression. They know this. Metzger told the panel about data presented by Dutch researchers at a recent meeting of the Pediatric Endocrine Society. Quote, some of the Dutch researchers gave some data about young adults who had transitioned and had reproductive regret, like regret. And it's there, he said. And I don't think any of that surprises us. He said that. It doesn't surprise us. One reason Metzger is not surprised is that he has observed regret in his own patients. Quote, I think now that I follow a lot of kids into their mid-20s, I'm like, oh, the dog isn't doing it for you, is it? And they're like, no, I just found this wonderful partner and now I want kids. And da, 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 he says. So I think, it doesn't surprise me, says Metzger. It doesn't surprise him that there's regret, that as children, they were allowed by society to consent to something that the doctors knew they didn't have the ability to consent to. They were allowed to consent to sterilization. And later on in their mid-20s, he's finding out that they regret it and they want kids. And he's like, doesn't surprise me. That's his attitude. In fact, the preliminary findings of the research to which Metzger appears to be referring were presented a few months later at WPATH's International Symposium in Montreal in September of 2022. The team of Dutch researchers gave a presentation of the results of the first long-term study of young people who had their puberty suppressed, and as Metzger suggested, the results were far from encouraging. In a segment titled Reflecting on the Importance of Family Building and Fertility Preservation, Dr. Joyce Asseler revealed that 27% of the young people who had undergone early puberty suppression, followed by cross-sex hormones and surgical removal of the testes or ovaries, now at an average age of 32, regret sacrificing their fertility. Or as the Dutch researchers worded it, quote, they find their infertility troublesome, end quote. A further 11%, so on top of that 27%, a further 11% are unsure how they feel about their infertility. And while none opted for fertility preservation in the form of freezing their eggs or sperm before embarking upon medical transition as adolescents, 44% of the natal females and 35% of the natal males would now choose fertility preservation if they could go back in time. The majority, 56% of study participants, either have the desire for children or have already fulfilled this desire, presumably by adoption. I'm going to pause here for just a second. I want to highlight again what these doctors are admitting in the video footage that we watched on Monday and that's being described here. They are admitting that when they talk about how sterilization and how this is going to affect fertility with children, that the children don't have the ability to really understand what they're saying or to know what they want or to know how hard certain things are, like adoption or in vitro fertilization, or they're children. These are like 9 to 11-year-olds they're talking to, and the doctors even laugh and giggle as they say this, that it's like talking to a wall because they're kids. And he even said that the kids come back and say like, ew, kids, gross. No, I don't want kids, because they're kids. This is why we don't allow children to make these kind of life-altering decisions when they're kids. Think back to when you were 10 years old. Did you have any concept of not only like what sex was or I mean, unless you were interfered with early by someone, if you were abused in some way or if you were exposed to it through peers. I know some guys have an earlier understanding of it. Guys I've talked to because they saw a porn magazine or something when they were young. But in general, even that understanding of it is childlike. Like, did you have a really comprehend what sex was, what marriage was, what you were going to be like as an adult? A lot of kids, you're at that stage when you're 10 years old where you don't even like the opposite sex, or you're like, oh, that's gross. And you can't think of yourself being a parent. You're still a child. You don't know if you're going to want kids or not. You don't know if you're going to if you're gonna like okra next year. Like, there are food choices that change over time. Do you know what I mean? It's like, ew, okra, gross. And then when you're an adult, you're like, I love okra. So I know I'm kind of making a joke about it, but it's highlighting an essential truth, which is that these are children. And even the doctors know that they're not able to decide at 10 years old if they're going to want to have a family or not. And you're taking that choice away from them, and you're pretending the system is pretending like they understand what they're consenting to. They don't. This is this is awful. This is a tragedy what we're doing to children. This is what society, we protect kids from things that we don't protect adults from, because we acknowledge that children are not the same as adults. Cognitively speaking, they're not the same. So, to whatever degree you believe in having a government and the purpose of government, even if you believe the purpose of government should be small, like I do, um, I believe it's really just to enforce laws that protect abuse from by one entity of another entity. And so those laws, we already, if you're on the left and you say, "Oh, government shouldn't get involved," and it's up to parents to decide how they raise kids, and government shouldn't get involved. Let's say that you believe in a very limited government, right? Or no government at all. Um, in most cases, even if you believe in limited government, you do agree with the government enacting and enforcing laws to protect kids. And I'm going to give some examples. And I know if you're on the left, you'll probably say, well, those are obvious. And yes, that's why I'm listing them. They're obvious because I know you agree with them. I'm trying to show you an example that you agree with. The government does not allow parents to murder their children. There are laws protecting against this. The government does not allow parents to rape their children. The government does not allow parents to abuse their kids. Um, there are laws that say, children are not allowed to drive cars. They're not allowed to drink alcohol. They're not allowed to smoke cigarettes. They're not allowed to have sex with adults. They're not allowed to vote. They're not allowed to buy a gun. There's an incredible number of ways that our law treats children differently than we treat adults, and for good reason. They are not adults. And there's something on that list, unless you're completely morally and ethically bankrupt, which I did talk to a lady once when I was with Billboard Chris. We were protesting at an event in New York with Mike Harlow. Actually, we were walking around with signs trying to have conversations. And I did talk to a lady there. It was at New York Pride. I talked to a lady there who said she said the queer theory line. She may not have realized where it came from, but in our conversation, she said she believes kids are just like adults and they should be able to do whatever they want, including have sex with adults. Okay, those kind of people are rare that are fully gone over to that dark kind of evil. Unless you're that kind of person, you can think of examples. I just listed some where we as a society treat children differently than adults. We acknowledge that they're different than adults, and we don't allow them to do certain things that we allow adults to do because we acknowledge that children don't have the cognitive ability to make the decisions to do those things and to understand the lasting permanent effect, like get a tattoo, you know, like buy alcohol, um, like own a gun, right? Like have sex with an adult. So I'm asking you, if you're on the left, why do you set this thing aside? And really think through why it is. Have you been conditioned to set it aside? Have you maybe, if you try to take yourself outside of your thought processes and look at it as an observer, look at how you arrived at this conclusion that it's okay that somehow kids are able to consent to sterilizing themselves and to removing their genitals and their body parts. How did you arrive there? Was part of it maybe because you don't want to be seen as a transphobe, and you think that anybody who opposes that is considered a transphobe? Is that part of it? I'm really asking you to think about how you came to that conclusion, and why is this different than why is protecting kids from sterilizing themselves or cutting off their body parts, why is that different from protecting them from consenting to having sex with adults or consenting to buying a gun or, getting a tattoo or drinking alcohol? Why is that different? Okay. I had to pause there and do that little bit. Maybe I'll clip that little bit. But I want people on the left to really think about, how did you get there? Oh, Fernando, thank you for the super chat for 249. He says, Charité is the largest hospital in Germany. Oh, okay. Thank you. I didn't know that. I hope I got it right that time. Frying Pants. I love your name. Good to see you again, Frying Pants. 499 says, these doctors are monsters. I agree. That's my description, my opinion of them too. Because they know what they're doing, right? They know what they're doing. Okay. We're going to continue here with this. The 27% regret rate is also very likely an underestimate. Asseler quotes one participant who did not find their infertility, quote, troublesome, who responded, quote, I can find it troublesome, but it's a little too late. Unfortunately, I can't change it even if I would like to, end quote. Also, like most other studies in this field, this one suffers from a high loss to follow up, with 50.7% of eligible participants failing to take part. So we cannot know the true regret rate in this cohort of young people. Berg remarked that the issue of 9-year-olds grappling with understanding lifelong sterility has her stumped. And Metzger acknowledged that, quote, most of the kids are nowhere in any kind of a brain space to really talk about it in a serious way, end quote. Again, this is what they're saying on camera in their private sessions, these doctors. They're admitting this. This bothers the WPATH expert who just wants, quote, kids to be happy, happier in the moment, end quote. While prioritizing the alleviation of a child's distress in the present moment at the cost of their future fertility is deeply misguided. Metzger makes further comments indicating that WPATH's gender affirming care doesn't even accomplish this dubious goal. Metzger says putting a 9-year-old on puberty blockers before they can get to the age of developing their sexual identity, quote, cannot be great. He says that, and admits that gender affirming doctors are, quote, to a degree, robbing these kids of that sort of early to mid pubertal sexual stuff that's happening with their cisgender peers, end quote. He says that we are robbing these kids of their development. Adolescence is a difficult time for any young person as they yearn for acceptance among their peers. Eric Erickson, a child psychoanalyst, stated that the primary goal of adolescence is to establish identity. He viewed adolescence as a time of confusion and experimentation. Building on Erickson's work, Canadian developmental psychologist James Marcia coined the term, quote, identity moratorium, describing the stage of adolescence as an exploration rather than a time for a young person to commit to any single cause or identity. Identity development during this crucial phase relies heavily on social interactions, and the experience of isolation and loneliness is especially distressing for a young person still finding their way in the world. Therefore, Metzger's comments show that WPATH is knowingly promoting a medical treatment that might exacerbate an adolescent's social challenges rather than alleviate them, meaning that this medical intervention, which comes at such an enormous cost, fails even to achieve Metzger's misguided aim of making kids, quote, happier in the moment, end quote. What's more, a thread in WPATH's internal messaging forum provides proof that some adolescents with developmental delays are being put on puberty blockers. A physician assistant and professor at Yale School of Medicine posted in the group asking for advice about a developmentally delayed 13-year-old who is already on puberty blockers but may not reach the, quote, emotional and cognitive developmental bar set by SOC 8 within the typical adolescent time frame, if at all, end quote, to give cognitive consent to cross-sex hormones. The Yale professor and practicing clinician wanted to know, when would it be ethical to allow the young patient to progress to, quote, gender affirming hormone therapy, end quote. A psychiatrist from Nova Scotia replied that the guiding principle would be weighing the harm of acting versus not acting. This WPATH member defined harm, in quotes, as halting puberty suppression, and advised that puberty blockers cannot be continued indefinitely without a sex steroid hormone as well. A Pennsylvania therapist replied saying, quote, kids with intellectual disabilities are able to consent to other surgeries, and wondered if there was important context missing from the original post. An activist and law professor at the University of Alberta shared a paper to help the Yale professor solve this ethical conundrum. Quote, regardless of patient's capacity, there's usually nobody better positioned to make medical decisions that go to the heart of a patient's identity than that of the patients themselves. It's the blind leading the blind. This developmentally impaired child, let's do what they say. I'm gonna there's another part here in the WPATH files where these doctors discuss a patient who comes in who wants to have limbs amputated because they identify as someone who's disabled. And they go back and forth about whether or not you're able to do that, like to take off a person's arm. That's the level of insanity we've reached. And because they believe nobody's better positioned to make medical decisions that go to the heart of a patient's identity than the patients themselves, well, then why not take off the arm? They identify as someone who's armless. The Hippocratic Oath says, first, do no harm. That's the primary, the number one thing that these doctors should be following that they're not following. Gender uniquely pertains, this continues, gender uniquely pertains to personal identity and self-realization. Parents are rarely better positioned to make complex medical decisions. This is the doctor telling the other doctor that the developmentally impaired child is better able to decide than the parents. Quote, well, look at this. Because parents are usually, quote, cisgender, meaning not transgender, they, quote, rarely have an intimate appreciation of transness or gender dysphoria and never have an intimate appreciation of the patient's gender subjectivity. Again, none of this is based on medicine, evidence, science. This is all a feeling. This is all ideology. They're basically saying that if you're not trans, which is subjective, we've learned you can just say I'm trans, identify as, so it's completely subjective. And if you're not that, then you don't have this intimate, special, magical knowledge that's more important than science or medicine or evidence. This special, intimate knowledge that you gain, your lived experience, you don't have that. So you don't get a say, because what we're going to prioritize as doctors is not medicine, science, or evidence. We're going to prioritize a special magical feeling from a subjective a subjective declaration that this is what needs to be done. This is all like voodoo medicine. Basically, what we're learning today and the previous 2 days going through the WPATH files is this is all mumbo jumbo voodoo stuff that we've been doing and allowing in hospitals, and they don't base it on any kind of science or rationality. It's completely subjective. And if you feel it and you got this special knowledge of who you are and the parent doesn't have the special knowledge, and you know, insanity. By contrast, patients, even developmentally delayed adolescents, have, quote, an intimate understanding of their own gender subjectivity. Do they, mumbo jumbo? And will almost always have a, quote, substantial, although limited appreciation, end quote, of the risk of harm and infertility. Really? You're just pulling this out of your bum. Where does this come from? Where's the science showing this is true? Therefore, according to this logic, minors who identify as transgender, even those with severe mental health issues or developmental delays, can, quote, appreciate both sides of the equation, end quote, meaning they are better positioned than their parents to make complex medical decisions that will have lifelong consequences. Wow. Okay. Makes no difference if they have if they're schizophrenic, if they have Down syndrome, if they have any kind of mental health issue or developmental delay, just no problem. You have a special intimate knowledge, mumbo jumbo, and we're going to do this for you because we're doctors and we don't do things based on science or medicine. We do it based on your intimate, special, magical feelings. Listen to this. This political activist who has no medical training is a frequent contributor to the conversations inside the WPATH forum. I know this to be true. I have a friend, former friend. We're still Facebook friends, though. She has not unfriended me. We knew each other from the comedy world and the leftist activism world when I was woke, when I worked in comedy. Okay. She's a comedian. She has a background in comedy and she has a background in activism. We worked with some of the same social justice woke nonprofits. After I woke up from woke around like 2016, 2017, we lost touch a little bit before that after I left New York, but we went separate ways. I left woke. This girl doubled down in woke. She ended up getting a job working for Harvard Medical School, no medical training, just like this person in the and had great influence. Her job was as she had one of those DIE titles, those LGBTQ plus such and such titles. Her job, no medical training, no medical background in comedy, background in activism. Her job was to train future medical doctors at Harvard and beyond because they sent her to conferences at other medical schools. And she was to teach and indoctrinate these medical students, these future doctors, on how biological sex was a social construct. It's not real, on all of this trans and kid stuff, that it's just an intimate feeling that you have, and that's what should guide medicine. She also was indoctrinating doctors that there's nothing unhealthy about being obese. There's no such thing as male and female. I've followed over the years as she would celebrate victories in her position at Harvard Medical School, where in one such case, they pressured a hospital to do away with the male female biological sex designation on medical ID bracelets. So you're walking around the hospital with an ID bracelet that doesn't even tell the doctors what your biological sex is. Kind of important. That was seen as a victory. I bring up this anecdote because I know intimately, I know that there are activists with no medical background who have been influencing medical policy and the schooling, the education of future doctors who have had great influence, ideological influence, not medical training, ideological influence on what's happening to kids on this kind of so-called medicine. Okay. This political activist who has no medical training is a frequent contributor to the conversations inside the WPATH forum. However, this opinion is, in fact, in line with WPATH's official stance on allowing adolescents with developmental delays to give cognitive consent to experimental sex trait modification interventions. In a 2022 public statement, WPATH called delaying or withholding puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones from adolescents with coexisting autism, other developmental differences, or mental health problems, quote, inequitable, discriminatory, misguided. Listen to that. They said in 2022, you have to allow patients with mental retardation, with mental health issues, like other like personality disorders, or with things like autism. You have to allow them to, they can understand and consent to this. You have to allow them. Otherwise, it's unequitable and it's discriminatory. Robbing adolescents of their developing sexual identities poses another problem for the panel of WPATH experts. As Metzger notes, this cohort's sexual urges are suppressed, meaning they are not, quote, learning how to masturbate, end quote. However, these same healthcare providers are tasked with discussing fertility preservation options with their patients who are not developmentally equipped to even understand the process. Again, they're being chemically castrated with the puberty blockers. So they don't even have a sex drive. And you're talking to them about fertility and marriage and stuff. In the case of natal males, the freezing of sperm requires that the adolescent has reached this crucial developmental stage. Especially for boys, the logic of early intervention dictates that puberty be suppressed as soon as possible, meaning before indigenous hormones have had a chance to make the body fertile. Berg is aware of this problem, telling the group, quote, in some ways, the stuff you need to do to be able to preserve your fertility might be beyond where a youth is at in terms of their sexual development. And yet that's kind of what's needing to happen, end quote. In traditional pediatrics, this type of conversation would only occur in oncology, like dealing with cancer. Fertility preservation is offered to children with certain disorders of sexual development, DSDs, and other rare health conditions, but it is only cancer treatment and gender-affirming medicine that cause iatrogenic infertility, meaning it is the treatment protocol that destroys the young person's fertility. Only in cancer treatment and so-called gender-affirming care. Prior to the advent of gender-affirming care, the only justifiable reason for sterilizing a minor was a potentially life-threatening cancer diagnosis. Yes, and this is part of the reasons they have pushed this lie, this manipulative approach to language, where they say, do you want a trans kid or a dead kid? They say this to parents. They say, if you don't allow this, if you don't allow us to sterilize your kid, then your kid's going to end up killing themselves. They lie. They outright lie. It's like a cluster B tactic. It is complete sociopathic deceit and manipulation, coercion. In a WPATH public statement from 2020, which was co-authored by two of the Identity Evolution Workshop panelists, the leading transgender health group claims that, quote, in general, mental health and medical professionals conduct evaluations of each youth family to ensure that interventions used to promote emotional and psychological wellness in these youth are appropriate and meet the young person's specific mental health and medical needs, end quote. As a result, this is another quote, professionals with experience and training to understand adolescent development and family dynamics are poised to understand the underlying factors behind a specific clinical presentation, said WPATH. Quote, the best interests of the child are always paramount for any responsible licensed provider. This is their public statement. The best interests of the child are most important. Compare that to what WPATH members say when they think the public is not listening. Jamison Green, a trans rights activist and former WPATH president and one of the co-authors of the statement, told the panel that many patients may never even see an endocrinologist and are instead getting their, quote, hormones prescribed through their primary care provider who doesn't really know necessarily everything about trans care, end quote. Green believes these primary care providers are just, quote, trying to be supportive, but explains that because the field of gender medicine is, quote, new and contentious, patients, even well-educated adults who are accessing care for the first time, will hastily glance at the informed consent form, not take any of the information in and say, quote, show me where to sign, because this is my moment. I got to grab it, end quote. This is what he's admitting behind the scenes. This comment is in complete contradiction to WPATH's official statement, claiming that a team of medical and mental health professionals carefully evaluate young patients. And we know this is a lie. You can watch videos of young people walking into clinics, gender clinics, for the first time, sitting down with a doctor for the first time and walking out with a prescription for testosterone in like 10 minutes. You can watch this. We know this is happening. If you're on the left, you may not know what's happening because you don't engage lots of times with source material. You won't watch those videos. You won't read the WPATH files. quote, "People also are afraid many times about surgery, and so they can read other people's descriptions about surgery and they'll miss details or they'll miss the most important piece of information for them simply because they're afraid to read it," explained Green. I'm going to stop here. This is the end of this section. Now, there's a little more about children not comprehending consent when you get to around page 38 or so. If you're reading at home and you want to read more of this today, if you want to jump down there, but I'm going to stop because this is the end of this section now. And I'm just a little tired of talking about this. I think it's so important to talk about it, but I think I'm talked out today. We'll be back tomorrow. We'll talk about more of it. But tired as in not that I don't want to talk about it anymore. I do. I think there's hardly anything that's more important right now. But tired as in reading a lot of it, it just can get a little depressing. It can get a little bit depressing because you're just like, I can't believe this is happening, right? Like when you're reading it, like this is allowed. Oh, I wanted to show you. I think I had it pulled up. Something I told you about in the actual files. Hold on. Let me scroll down. I wanted to show you this crazy part. Oh, this part. Here we go. Look at this. Since I mentioned it, and if you haven't gotten to the end of the files, you may not have seen this. So I say it's 130 pages, but a large portion of it, like after page 72, is all just screenshots of it's all the evidence, it's all the sources. So you can go through and read all these screenshots, and it's also video files. So the report itself is, it's not like 130 pages of the written word. So look at this part. Can you see this screenshot on the mental health concerns? This is where WPATH members are discussing amputation for patients with, quote, body integrity identity disorder, BIID. This is what they're calling body integrity identity disorder. This is where patients are transabled, where patients identify as a disabled person or a person who is missing body parts, and so they would like to have the doctors validate them and to amputate body parts for them so they can become disabled, like they say their true identity is. Now, if you follow only ideology, which is what these doctors have been doing, then how is this different? Why wouldn't it's a subjective feeling, right? So why wouldn't you do this? So look at this. Hi. And they've redacted some of the names here and stuff. Sorry for the long delay in replying. Thank you for your thoughts on this. Yours is exactly the question that I hope to answer through consultation. There seems to be little research about this condition, although it does seem that amputation has provided relief for several clients. My assumption is that it will be very difficult to find surgeons willing to do an amputation and to get health insurance funding for the procedure. I agree with an affirmative approach, however. Affirmative validating, right? However, my main concern is my own lack of experience to differentially diagnose this from other mental health concerns that may be at play here. Oh, really? Suddenly you're concerned there might be underlying mental health problems, but you're not concerned about underlying mental health problems when a child tells you they're trans. Only if a person says they want you to cut their arm off. As it turns out, there has been a change in the portion of the body causing distress. Generally speaking, I've found in speaking with people who are experiencing BIID, bodily integrity identity disorder, that this leads to be often a lifelong issue that is as persistent as gender identity and as unlikely to be resolved without surgical intervention. This physician is like, cut the arm off. However, for ethical reasons, ethics comes into this, does it? For ethical reasons, medical professionals are generally unlikely to help facilitate the surgical interventions. Really? You won't cut the arm off, but you'll cut a child's breast off. You'll cut a child's penis off, but you're not going to cut the arm off of the adult? Oh, because of ethical concerns? Where are the ethics when it comes to the children's genitals? For ethical reasons, medical professions are generally unlikely to help facilitate the surgical interventions that would be necessary to align the bodies of people with BIID with their minds. Just like gender identity surgery, right? This person identifies as someone missing an arm in the war. Can you help? I would like to help them. I am a doctor. Some people say I gotta have ethics, but I would like to align their body with their mind. That's what this doctor's saying. Like, oh my god. Okay. I'm this is crazy. I'm laughing because this is so insane. We have to have a moment of levity though how insane this is. Necessary to align the bodies of people with BIID with their minds. In the few publicized cases where this has occurred, however, the patient is typically satisfied and happy with the outcome. As you're probably aware, if a person with BIID becomes desperate enough, they may attempt to self amputate or engineer an injury that would require medical intervention to obtain the body that they feel they need. Yeah, so maybe they should be put in a mental hospital against their will until you figure out what's wrong with them. If they're going to threaten self harm, like we do with people threatening suicide, like maybe, maybe they should be put into a mental hospital so you can watch them and watch the behavior and figure out what's wrong with them. Oh my gosh. Okay. They may attempt to self amputate or engineer an injury that would require medical intervention to obtain the body they feel they need, or they may seek out people who would perform surgery on them illicitly. All of these are dangerous. However, logical reasoning and detailed examination of the concrete risks involved with trying to do either of these things tends to keep the person from taking actions that might result in unintended negative consequences, like death or an incomplete or different disability than the one they intended. I'm sorry. Once again, like I was just trying to cut my arm off, but I cut through my leg and I wasn't like what I know it's dark humor, guys, but it's like they they intend to inflict the one disability, but they might accidentally inflict a different disability, not the one they wanted, but that tends to keep them from trying. Talk therapy may prevent self-harm, but it is not likely to make the feelings of BIID go away without surgical intervention. Again, this person is fully on the side of amputating that body part. Still, it may keep your client safe. And then they go on to say, this other doctor, thank you so much for sharing your experience and thoughts. It's greatly appreciated. And this doctor says, it's fascinating. I have no easy answers, but it's clear these individuals do display some characteristics similar to trans people. You don't say. The body issues, obviously, but also that the unhappiness is long lasting and resistant to other reparative interventions, the possibility of self surgery, etc. I fear one may have here a group of particularly unfortunate individuals to whom medical science is as hostile as was once the case with trans people. You hear that last sentence? They view it as hostile, that it's not the consensus yet that doctors won't just go in and amputate an arm of someone who self-identifies as an armless man, as a disabled man. They say that's being hostile to them. And they're saying, thank goodness, basically, that we no longer are hostile to little kids who say that they're trans. We'll cut that penis and that or those breasts right off. That's basically what this person's saying. This doctor. Reality is hostile, says Robert. Okay. I'll fight you naked. Thanks for the super chat. I'll fight you naked for $2. His history will call these doctors the Mengelites. I hope so. Thank you for that. We are going to win this thing. We are going to stop this barbarism. That was great news out of the UK this morning. And I have no doubt we're going to end this practice. I just don't know how we're going to treat these doctors, because I have a feeling they're going to do what they did with COVID and just feign ignorance. How could we have known what we were doing was wrong? I really hope that's not the case. I hope that they have Nuremberg style trials. I hope these doctors go to prison for life, not just lose their medical license, of course. I hope they are put in prison away from the general population, because they're not safe people. Okay. I'm going to wrap this up. I appreciate you guys hanging out. Tomorrow at 1 o'clock Central, we're going to do another WPATH Files. We're going to continue on. We're going to watch some video tomorrow, probably 1 o'clock Central here on Deprogrammed. And then at 6 o'clock Central, we're doing that Christian panel, which is always a fun time. It's going to be myself, Odin from OMB Reviews, Michelle from Force of Light Entertainment, Brahma Bull, and special guest, Drunk 3PO. We're going to be talking about the movie Ordinary Angels starring Hilary Swank. It's currently in theaters, and I hope you'll join us at 6 o'clock tomorrow. It'll be a lot of fun. And yes, Wendy, we covered this at the beginning of the show. It's great news. Wendy says, for anyone just joining, NHS just banned puberty blockers today for kids. That's a start. Dawn, thanks for doing this, Keri. This stuff can be so hard to read alone. It helps to have others to share the fury and incredulity with. Yes, it does. That's why we're doing it. So it's like sitting down with this stuff and trying to read it. And it's so long, and it's really depressing. Some of it, this is happening. So I felt like, let's do it together, and then we can have some dark laughs about them discussing whether or not it's ethical to cut a guy's arm off. Like, okay. I thank you, Therese. Go do something fun. I've been working out. I'm look, I'm going to say this in case you need the motivation. I'm getting back into working out regularly. I've had several false starts. I used to work out all the time. My best friend who lived with us for a while, she was a trainer, and I let that fall by the wayside, and for many reasons. But I've been getting back into going to these regular classes, doing yoga, a little weightlifting again, doing some more cardio, going for long walks and stuff, getting back into it slowly, easing my way back to where I was. And my body is so sore. Completely, my husband was laughing at me because I was trying to feed the dog and trying to feed Tiger, and I had to slowly bend down, very slowly. So I'm going to get my insurance covers a 30-minute massage or something at this medical place. I'm going to get a medical massage to try and help. That's what's happening. I'm very excited. And yeah, if you need the motivation, hey, get back into it with me. We can catch up together in video. You can tell me how you're doing in the chat. You can start slow. You don't have to start like at whatever place you used to be. You can start something slow, like walking. You can start with yoga. You can start with some Pilates or some of these other kinds of low intensity workouts, but we can do it together. Arnica, yes. Thank you, Texas Sheep Lady. Arnica helps with soreness. Real Raven, I haven't gotten back to you yet. I do have my sound issues, I think, pretty much sorted, but I've got you. I intend to get in touch with you when we get the new camera, which we're delayed on now because we had a lot of expenses this past few months that we did not expect. So as soon as I get that new camera, I am going to probably be asking just for your advice on the audio, because we're going to try and do some in-person interviews. Oh, and I'll show you this bit of fun. This is a bit of levity since we had a serious issue today. Look at this hat I found at the Goodwill yesterday. It was only $3. Look at that. And it lights up, and it's a American flag cowboy hat, $3. I can't wait for 4th of July. I thought that was fun. Okay. I'll let you guys go. Have a great rest of your day. And thanks for hanging out. Thanks for being in the live chat. If it's your first time here and you like this episode, please consider hitting like and subscribe. If you want to support the channel, Deprogram, you can do so here at YouTube by becoming a member, which is, I think, is as little as $1 a month, which helps us. And also, you can do that at Locals, at Subscribestar, or Patreon. I will My husband's here. My husband says Keri was walking through our dark house last night with that hat on. Oh, yes, because you know what? Fun things like this is part of the joy I have in funny, silly, cheap things is I like when my husband laughs. So I just put this on because I was going to bed and I needed to take it upstairs anyway. So I put it on with the lights on and I was coming up the stairs. He was like, "What? What are you doing?" It is fun. It is fun. Okay. Oh, look at this, Cheeky Mare. I've lost 20 pounds since the first of the year. Give it up for Cheeky, guys, in the chat. That's awesome. Congratulations. Well, we can do check-ins in the chat with how people are doing if you want with working out. I love that. Okay, you guys have a great rest of your day. And again, tomorrow we've got a 1:00 stream of WPATH Files and a 6:00 stream of that Christian panel. And I hope to see you tomorrow. Take care.